home.
Oh, was it? Was it
6:15, and I realised I was at the shop and I thought, oh no, I'll have to walk because Tony took us both over the car and she came home to feed the dog and everything. I was like, oh man, I did a 20-minute walk in just under 15 minutes. So.
I've walked that before. So did he come across the across
the park? Yeah,
the park? Yeah.
So crazy. So enough about my journey home. Guys, welcome along to our Blether tonight. We've missed you. It's been 2 weeks with holidays and everything going on. We've not had a Blether for a couple of weeks, but we've got an absolute cracking night for you tonight. To return with, following on from a trio of great previous hosts, we come back with Drew McKenzie-Smith, the founder, creator, and owner of Lindores Abbey. You can see the bottles behind us. You might have heard a little bit about this Lindores Abbey releasing their whiskey. July was packed full of Lindores chat, and it's great to see. So we've got Alistair, we've got Dave, Phil, all joining in. Alistair, of course, founder of.
Alistair's all prepared. He's got the whole kit up. He's very ready.
He's well prepared. I think Alistair is the founder of just about every appreciation distillery on Facebook at the moment. He's doing some great stuff to get all these new distilleries in the public. So we'll talk to Drew when he comes on about the Lindores appreciation. David, good to see you again. Guys, we love to hear what's in your glass. So let us know what you're drinking. I'm away to. I quite often like to do a bottle kill. Tonight I'm going to do a bottle pop, I suppose, a bottle open.
I'm a little bit into mine, and had a little wee warm up on the coast earlier on as well. So yeah.
We'll bring Drew in while I fight with the cellophane. Have a wee introduction. So here we go, and the technology is working. We're all good. Good evening, Drew. How are you?
Not so bad. A good sunny day down in Fife. Well, that's not a real picture behind me. Actually, it's not. It's peeing with rain outside at the moment. If I'm all honest,
it's going to rain heavily overnight. We've got a little bit saying in the shop just recently. I've been working a little bit more for a couple of reasons. I don't normally work so much, but every day I'm in the shop, it's glorious sunshine, and all my days off are raining. When Mike wakes up in the morning, he always knows if I'm coming to work because it's always sunny.
I think that's called Sod's Law, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Yeah. Today, it really confused me today because I woke up. Well, I kind of had the dogs out and stuff, and it was sunshine. I was like, I text Russell, "Are you sure you're not working today? It seems like a fine day."
It's not easy.
So we've been lucky so far. We've missed the rain up to so it's meant to hit us tonight about 10 o'clock. Isn't it, to start?
That will help.
Yeah, it'll be raining tomorrow for you to be in work, Russell. So.
Yes, absolutely. I know, and I should be off with the rain. So.
we do events here as well, and we've got 100, and with all the COVID, this, that, and the other, we've got 170 people coming. So it's got to be outside, and. If it's raining, it's raining. Not a lot you can do about it.
Will that change
marquees or anything for?
We do. We've got bits and bobs that people can. If it really gets bleak, they can shelter. You can't see it from here. But what's quite nice is the main place you can shelter in the Abbey ruins. So where I'm sitting now in my office, one window is looking out towards the Abbey ruins. My other window is looking right up to the distillery. But where I can see in the Abbey ruins is a big arch, it's really great that it's the main thing that still exists. So that was called the Slipe, which when the Abbey existed, the Slipe was like the back door. And it was through the Slipe that William Wallace came after the Battle of Black Ironside. So that was his last skirmish on Scottish. So it was his last victory over the English. Sadly, it wasn't not long after that he got captured, and we all know the rest of the story. But it's quite kind of fitting that that's the one bit that still survives. Yeah. A lot of the guests that come here for events and weddings have no idea it's just a bit of an old abbey, because they've come here as a wedding guest. They've not come here as a distillery guest or anything like that, and not read the history. and they have no idea that if they were there about 700 years ago, they've been flattened by Wallace and his men charging through. So
that's not a bad office to have, though, Drew.
it's not. No, I'm lucky. I mean, 5 years ago, before the distillery existed, where I'm sitting now was the coal shed. It's at the back of the garage, and that's what it was all my life. So it's quite nice sitting here now with electricity and all these new fancy things like that.
Excellent. Do you think will that change on Monday? Will you be allowed people inside now with the new lifting?
Yeah, well, we have already. I mean, throughout lockdown, we kept distilling because, as you'll know, it's an essential industry according to HMRC, which is fair enough. With the tourism element, we tried as long as we could to keep it going, but it got to the point, you could only have 4 people from 2 houses or what have you. So we did stop tours for quite a while, but now we're pretty much back to full speed. Completely different because pre-lockdown, it's kind of bizarre. So pre-lockdown, we didn't have the whiskey. So we had slightly different tourists here. Now we're a sort of grown-up whiskey distillery. And also we've got staycationers coming. And they seem to be, they want to buy whiskey. That we're not getting people on bikes in their Lycra who can't, well, they can maybe buy whiskey, but they can't carry it away with them. So yeah, no, it's a different, less people, but they're enjoying it more. So yeah, we're in a kind of good place at the moment.
Yeah. I think now that people are starting to learn about the history, not just of the distillery, but of the Abbey, you'll get a lot more of that interest factor and more of that. The whiskey geek turning up who wants to know about the whiskey and things, because you started off with the Aqua Vitae, so it's something it was different. Everyone else was doing gin, of course. Everyone's kind of coming out and doing the gin as their kind of fundraiser or start off. You guys went down the Aqua Vitae. So what was the reasoning behind?
Well, it's funny that my bank manager would kill me and has often wanted to kill me over the years, I'm sure, but because there was a 15-year lead in to actually starting to create the distillery, so there's snippets online and this, that and the other from way back, and in all of them I said we won't do a gin. It genuinely, it was a question I was asked more than anything. In fact, it wasn't a question, often it was like an assertion, so you will be doing a gin. And I kept sort of saying, well, no. I said, I'm not anti-gin. I like some gins, etc. But given our story, if you like, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't going all the way back to the Exchequer Roll and what the monks did, etc., etc. So if the first thing that came from Lindores was some kind of gin, it would have undermined our whole story, the whole point of us being here. And as I say, as I watched the gin market keep going up and up and up, and then flavored gins going up and up and up and up, I thought, bloody hell, maybe should have. But now we've got to the point that we have whiskey. I'm genuinely glad we stuck to our guns and did the Aqua Vitae, because the whole reason I'm sitting here now really is that one wee entry in the Exchequer Rolls of 1494, going all the way back to there. And what Friar John Core was making was Aqua Vitae. He wasn't making gin. So it was Aqua Vitae, Usquebaugh, whiskey. So it seemed like it was a no-brainer. Financially, you could argue as a no-brainer because I really like Aqua Vitae and lots of people are growing to like it. But if you start a category, you're asking for trouble. If we take it into places, they say, does it sit with the gins or the vodkas or the liqueurs and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't. So the slight difficulty Murray had, who we mentioned earlier, so if he was going into a place and had to spend the first 10 minutes saying what this product isn't, it's quite tricky because, well, as you guys will know, you haven't got hours and hours to spend with some guy trying to sell you a spirit. So the Aqua Vitae, it's in great places. And I think genuinely now the whiskey's out, more people will try the Aqua Vitae. And fair enough, I would say I like it. That's a given. But more and more people are getting to like it. So yeah, so we did it. We arguably, with my business head on, we should have done a gin. But now we've got to this point. I'm glad we didn't. We kind of kept the moral high ground.
Absolutely.
I totally agree. And the tasting that I mentioned to you just a little bit earlier that I was on, Murray came in with the raw spirit to start with, which is very drinkable in itself. Lovely fruit salad. The seaside, fantastic in a cocktail, a daiquiri.
Raw spirit there.
Yeah.
Onto the aquavite and then onto the whiskey, and it's a lovely progression where you can't do that with a gin. You know, going into a distillery and getting raw spirit, then gin, then whiskey just doesn't seem like a progression. But that progression is just a lovely way to take you through the process.
And now that we've got to the stage we're at, what we're finding is people are beginning, now that we have a Lindores house style, if you like. So if you taste a new make and you taste some whiskey, etc., you can begin to detect sort of Lindores, and it's there in the aquavitae as well. It's obviously a wee bit more hidden, but it's there. So we're really pleased we did it, and what we're looking forward to is it evolving. You know, we're planting orchards, we're doing all sorts of stuff. So, you know, being historically accurate is quite a good thing in the sense that we know when the monks made it here and everywhere else. You know, it wasn't just Lindores, and it wasn't just for drinking. I mean, it was. I'm sure aquavitae was originally for medicinal, you know, for rubbing it on wounds, etc. Mm-hmm. My theory, my pet theory, especially in this part of Fife or wherever, is you get this spirit and you get 5 people in a room, be they monks or anything else, and one of them's going to try drinking it. And as a more enlightened friend would say, well, if we're going to drink it, let's try and make it taste nice. And I genuinely think that's kind of how it evolved. And that's exactly what we did with our aquavitae. We worked with Heriot Watt Uni to kind of do the science behind it. So it's our new make spirit, macerated with plants that grow around the monastery. And that was historically accurate, but the actual spirit is, if we're honest, we kept going in for tastings. Oh God, this is not good. You know, really, it was too green, it was too bitter. And we thought, well, it's great. We could tick all the boxes for historical accuracy, but if it tastes rank, no one's going to buy it. So that's the slight eureka moment was when we thought, well, let's give it to the bartenders and the mixologists, if you like, of Edinburgh. The guys at Timber Yard were very involved. And we thought, well, how do we make it just a teeny bit sweeter? We're not talking drambuie, but we just need to, you know, it was too bitter. And so we know that the monks of Lindores traded with Flanders. There's 4 big books of Lindores. I'm the only person that's read them, I think, to be quite the only living person that's read them. So we know where they were trading. So they were trading with Flanders in Europe. And there's little minutiae which I love. So for instance, you had 12 barrels of salmon to Flanders, 2 thrown overboard because they were rotten. So even back in the 13th century, you had accountants doing all that kind of stuff, and you had people saying, well, I'm not taking that because they're rotten barrels. So, but they had access to dates and raisins and spices. Now, we'll never know if they bought dates and raisins and spices, but that gave us a license, if you like, to thought, well, if we want to sweeten it, it has to be 100% natural. Let's try the dates and raisins, and that's what we ended up with. So that's why the finished aquavitae is slightly sweeter. The unexpected consequence, which is quite nice, is that's why it's also amber. You know, because otherwise it would have just been like a gin or a vodka, and I think that would have been an even harder sell. So yeah, so we ended up with this kind of product. The funny thing is, in this world, when we're certainly where I was new to the drinks world and distilling and this, that, and the other, and bottle shapes and labels and all that kind of stuff. So we actually had the labels made before the product was kind of finished. So luckily, this is with the aquavitae. If you look at the back label on a bottle of aquavitae, and it'll talk about best served with a wee bit of honey. Luckily, I don't think anyone reads that kind of stuff, because if you did have it with honey, it'd be way, way too sweet. But we'd had the labels printed by then, and I'm too tight to change them. So it's actually grown organically, because we didn't know how people would drink it. Would you drink it neat, or would you drink it as part of a cocktail? And so what's evolved with the aquavitae is the kind of perfect serve is ginger ale, ice, and a wee bit of orange. And that wasn't through us doing clever tasting panels. It was just that's the way that people liked it. So yeah, we ended up with an interesting product.
Right.
Yeah. I like the flavour. I think it likens me to Southern Comfort. So I would definitely have it with a bit of lemonade. Gary mentioned using it in an espresso martini, which I haven't done yet. Yeah. But I really fancy giving that a go as well.
Yeah, that's the popular one as well. And we quite like the fact that people.
Gary Murray.
We didn't say to people, this is how you got to have it. It kind of evolved. In Scandinavia, it's popular, just neat, with smoked fish and smoked meats and things like that. So, you know, we like people just kind of finding the best way to have it.
Excellent. Alistair's just popped up. He's having his aquavite with ginger ale and ice. Saying it's fine. So yeah. If you guys out there are drinking the aquavite, let us know how you're drinking it and how you're enjoying it. It's always good to hear what other people. If you're in the whiskey, you know, I think when you mention mixing whiskey or serving whiskey, it always, you know, people are aghast and you can't do that.
Yeah,
I think it's important to kind of promote that and say, you know, this brings whiskey to a whole new audience. If you,
well, very very early on very soon after the aquavitae sort of existed and it was bottled. This is a couple of years back, and my wife and I were invited over to Limburg, and you'll probably know the Limburg Whiskey Festival is geek central, and I mean that in a good way. I mean it's absolutely sort of hardcore. And they invited us over and said, well, you know, why don't you bring your aquavitae? And I didn't know that what they were saying is it's not a competition, but there's a tasting of new products. And of course there was aquavitae and 7 whiskies. And I thought, well, I'm going to get crucified here because there was 1,000 people around with ponytails and black T-shirts and German accents who know more about whiskey than I'll ever know in my life. And I thought, well, this is hardcore, but they loved it. So I thought, well, actually, you know what? Once people understand that we're not pretending it's a whiskey, even though it's the same new make, that it's 5% new make aquavitae, 95 into the casks, which is now the Lindores spirit we've got here. So they kind of got that. They got the fact that we can't call it whiskey because it hasn't been matured, but actually it's still got the same DNA as our current whiskey has.
As you say, it comes through. That core flavour kind of comes through them. Well, yeah, I had the pleasure of tasting my first Lindores on a virtual event with yourself and Murray. And what immediately struck me was a really nice fresh ginger or gingerbread kind of note coming from the whiskey. And it's so nice that just a freshly baked out of the oven gingerbread just comes through, and I can't kind of move on from that. It's just so prominent for me. I'm trying to. I'm wondering, maybe I haven't tried it with water at all. I think like 46%, 46. Water might just open up some nice new flavour. So I'm going to try that tonight. I'm going to add some water and we'll play about with it and see what we get.
Excellent.
I want to talk a little bit more about yourself, because you've had quite an interesting history with chefing and catering for the stars and various top hotels. So what was it that made you think whiskey's the answer? What that moved you into that?
I suppose luck. It's a weird. I've always believed that you kind of make your own luck, and things fall into your lap, but you've got to be there to make it happen. And my wife Helen and I, we worked in London. I worked at an auction house, and she was a classic car dealer. And then, sadly, her granddad died, and he had a cottage in the Lake District, so we just moved to the Lake District. And then thought, Christ, what do we do now? We moved there because it was a nice place, but you need to make a living. And that's when I stumbled into chefing. I genuinely stumbled into it, but I can go back to that in a minute. But what led to the whiskey, I suppose, was, home has always been Lindores. You know, Lindores Abbey. My great granddad bought Lindores Abbey Farm in 1913, and for $3,000. It's quite nice. We still got the original sales brochure, if you like. And it's not a big, you know, it's 98 acres, and just in the middle of the part of the farm is the remains of Lindores Abbey, and it was a nice thing to have, but it was just the back garden. I mean, I used to ride a motorbike. I used to, you know, all things that you do, and then you think, oh Christ, I shouldn't have done that. but it was just our back garden, and it would still just be our back garden. Really, if it hadn't been for, and this is where the luck bit, I suppose, comes in, is 20 years ago, oh, it's maybe 21 years ago now, and I wasn't here. We were down in the lakes, I think, at the time. Anyway, this guy came to the front door and said to my dad, do you mind if I go for a walk around the Abbey ruins? And Dad thought, well, yeah, you know, knock yourself out. It's a bit, no one had ever asked to do that. It was, Granddad used to keep his cows in there. As I say, I used to ride a motorbike and this, that, and the other. So I thought it was quite a strange thing, but said, yeah, no, absolutely fine. And then about 6-7 months later, this book arrived. I've got it just over here, actually. So this book arrived called Scotland and Its Whiskies by Michael Jackson. And this would be the late Michael Jackson, the top whiskey and beer. In fact, I'll grab it here if I don't knock everything off. Yeah, so this book arrived in the post, and it sort of said, to Ken. Actually, this is one he gave to me and Helen. But so this was the second one. So it's to Drew and Helen. Good luck with Lindores, Michael. 1st of May 2001. But the first copy he sent to my dad, and it said, "Dear Ken, thank you very much. Turn to page 127." And Dad did that. And on page 127, there's a lovely picture of the Abbey ruins, and the title at the top of the chapter anyway is "For the Whiskey Lover, It Is a Pilgrimage." And then he goes on about wandering around saying a silent prayer to Friar John Core and all this sort of stuff. And that was genuinely the first we had any clue that Lindores Abbey was anything other than, it has great history. I was saying earlier about William Wallace and all these things, but we had no idea about the Friar John Core link. And so that made me think, well, Christ, I've got to see what we can do about that. It's too good a thing to fall into your lap to not at least try. Yeah. And I did try for a while. And really at that stage, it was, can we get money to put a shed in the ruins and put a kind of historic thing about Friar John Core? But even that, I mean, I didn't have the money even for that really at the time. And so we tried, and I did bring out one limited edition whiskey way back. But it wasn't really, I got lots of huge encouragement from the industry, but no cash. And, as you'll all know, it's great. Enthusiasm is brilliant, but, money is better if you're trying to actually do something. But the industry wasn't in such a positive place back then. And so I tried for a few years and then thought, well, it's not really happening. About 6-7 years ago, I had a call from a friend in the industry, because I wasn't even reading the whiskey press. I wasn't aware of all these distilleries popping up. And he said, look, if there should be a new distillery anywhere, it's Lindores. And I thought, well, yeah, you're right. So a bit dramatic, carpe diem, seize the day and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, right, okay, well, let's do your best. So I managed to scrape together $5,000 and got the following $5,000 from Fife Business Gateway. And that's what created the feasibility study, and now I'm sitting here because that worked, and it really did. So it was a kind of roller coaster ride, but without the Friar John Core history element, I don't think it would have happened, because I didn't have that. We had the farm, which is great, but farming, as you see from Jeremy Clarkson's program, all these kind of things, you don't make much money out of it. So anyway, so yeah, it was some luck, a lot of hard work and twisting of arms, and we have a distillery.
But given the backstory, and I've just wrote a wee note there. It's like whiskey's coming to use a kind of, unfortunately, an English term, but it's almost as if whiskey's come home, because the roots are there. It would have been a travesty if having then suddenly thought, gosh, we've got to do something with that you didn't get the backing to do it. You can understand, Joe Bloggs in the middle of nowhere with a nice setting, just wanted to make some whiskey. But with that story, it would have been complete travesty not to have gone ahead.
Well, the other thing that drove me on was after I first found out, and you think about it, this is how long ago it was. Obviously internet existed, but there wasn't a zillion things going on. And I thought, and this is when I was still chefing, so it was after a busy night, so it was about 11 o'clock, and I went online, having just learned about the link. And I thought, well, how do I find out if there's any interest in this kind of thing at all? So I found a list of whiskey clubs, and it was alphabetical. And the first one that came up was Anne Quake of Canada. So I sent this thing saying, wouldn't it be great to do something at Lindores? And to be quite honest, I didn't think much more of it. And then the next morning, I woke up and there was this most effusive response you could ever imagine. And it was from Ed Patrick, who it still is the kind of president of that whiskey society in Canada. And it was, we'll set the heather alight. This is the biggest news in whiskey for 500 years. And I thought, wow. And that genuinely gave me the impetus. And what's really nice is I've still got a hard copy of the email. And he came here with Anne Quake pre-lockdown. So it's quite nice because that was one of the things. Without that, I probably wouldn't have had the real drive to do it. And I was amazed at how effusive it was. And it was only a wee bit later, and I thought with the time difference, I thought, I bet when he wrote all that, he'd had a few drams because it was so effusive. I thought, bloody hell. But anyway, hey, it fired me up enough to do it. But their point was, in a sense, that they couldn't believe, and I got things from American whiskey people, that they couldn't believe there's this property with all this provenance, not just with whiskey, but everything else. And it was just, if I'm honest, a falling down. The monastery had fallen down 500 years ago, but even the farmsteading, because we had stopped farming as such, we just rented it out for people with horses and things like that. So it was all kind of falling down, and they couldn't believe it. If that was in America, it would be like a scheduled ancient monument. In fact, I've got a good rapport from way back with Steve Bashaw. So he's the guy who is a distillery manager at Mount Vernon in America. So that's the one they built at George Washington's estate. And I suppose that's the difference between America and us to a certain extent, because, and I could get shot for saying this, they don't have the same history that we have.
No.
And so what happened with Mount Vernon's one is they found some traces of wood that they realized was part of a distillery, long since gone. But the ladies of Washington who supported Mount Vernon, one of whom was a Mrs. Mars, and gave them enough money to rebuild the distillery. So they've got this fantastic distillery, which I've been lucky enough to visit, built plank by plank, the same as the existing one that Washington had. And what they were saying to me is, oh, well, you should do the same thing. You should raise all this money and build it as it would have been in Friar John Cause. And I was sort of saying, well, trouble with that is, it's a great idea, but A, to have to raise the money, and B, we would make about 3 bottles a month. So, we love the idea, but we need to make it more in the modern.
A bit more industrial, absolutely.
Yeah, so some of the ideas, I suppose, that come across building a new distillery are all very dream-orientated, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then the practicality comes in, and you have to curb it a little bit, but I mean, the distillery looks fantastic. You can see it there behind you, with the big glass at the front. It looks absolutely stunning. And I quite like the idea that you've got the Abbey separate, where you can see it in its current form, rather than having it built in. I think if you were doing a distillery tour and you said this was part of the old Abbey, it would be hard to imagine it with modern stuff around about it. So I think it's nice that it's ended up being separate.
You're exactly right. When I was looking for architects, the only rule, as I say, I've never built a distillery before or anything like that. The only rule I had when I was chatting to them and getting their ideas is if they started going on about stained glass windows and all that, I think, well, you're not quite getting it. We get the monastic link, and it's hugely important. And we want it. And funny enough, what's quite nice, and this wasn't, well, maybe it was a clever idea of the architect, to be quite honest with him, and you can't see it just there, but what's really nice, because it's opposite the ruins and you've got all that glass, it is reflected in it, so you might as well be in it. So it's a really nice thing to do, but we have to separate sort of the history from distilling. You know, we want it to be seen as a modern distillery with a historic past, but not be stuck to slavishly to that stuck with it.
There's a wonderful episode of The Vicar of Dibley. I don't know if it's something that you've watched, where they raise money to replace the stained glass window, and in actual fact, what they actually put in is just a window. But the view with the sunset is just fantastic, and they just say, "All right, that's the right thing to do." The rest of the money, I think I can't remember the vicar's name, but she sent it to charity.
All right.
But I couldn't bear with paying all that money for a window. So this window is here, and it was the right thing to do because the view and everything was spectacular. So you've got the view looking out, and then looking into the distillery, the same thing. So
well, I suppose I'd never thought about it till then, but it's also a window you can't see through if it's stained glass. You know, I get the whole sort of religious and all this sort of stuff, but we really like to reflect the history, etc., but not just be bogged down by. I mean, funny enough, very early on in the process, I worked a lot with Dr. Jim Swan, and because I was fortunate, because there was a 20-year gap between thinking about it and actually doing it, I made all these contacts, and Jim was a great friend as well as latterly a colleague as well. And we did discuss at the very beginning that we could have gone down two routes at Lindores. There was, there's Friar John Core, there's William Wallace, there's all these things. And we could have been a kind of a whiskey Disneyland thing. So people would come and we'd bang on about Friar John Core and William Wallace, bring out a kind of maybe even a blend that people would buy one bottle of, maybe not even ever drink, and then chuck it on the shelf and tick the box. They've been to the Loch Ness Monster kind of distillery.
What the Braveheart.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone will be wearing monk's robes. But I promised Jim at the time that I think the best way to honor that legacy, if you like, is by bringing out a really good spirit, a serious spirit, using Forsyth stills, etc., and not going down the cheap and cheerful route. And again, it's one of these things. I'm delighted we did, rather than going down that other route. And time will tell, but we've made a good start to it anyway. I like to think.
Yeah. Phil's just popped on the chat there about asking about your spirit styles. How did you go about defining that style? You touched on it earlier on about creating the Aqua Vitae, but you would have had a very particular idea, and I suppose Jim Swan would have had a great influence on that as well.
Yeah, he did. Well, Jim was, as I say, he was a friend as well as a colleague, and I've been to lots of Jim's distilleries that he worked with. Had some great drams in all of them. What separates us is that tragically Jim died halfway through our project, which was obviously tragic. So Jim had, by that stage, we had worked a lot with Forsyths, and just kind of winding it back, when Jim first came on board, having dismissed the Disneyland thing, I said, well, okay, if we want to make the premium spirit, we've got to kind of honor the history and find the money to do what he thinks we should do. So the first tick in that box, if you like, I suppose, was using Forsyths. There are other still makers, obviously, but Forsyths, I think, for me anyway, the Rolls-Royce are still makers. And we also then used them for a turnkey project, because I was, again, lucky enough to speak to a lot of people on the way, and one of them whom was Anthony Wills, who's a great guy up at Kilhoman. And I really admire Anthony because he did it the hard way, if you like. Kilhoman was the first new distillery for years and years and years. So he didn't have other people to ask, if you like, whereas there's been a million other distilleries since Kilhoman, all of whom have beaten a track to Anthony's door. And he could have quite understandably said, well, look, I've done it the hard way, so you do likewise. But he wasn't, he isn't that sort of person. So it was hugely helpful to us. And one of the bits of advice when we were talking about for size was, it's very tempting not to go for a turnkey contract, because obviously that is more expensive. The problem is, if you don't, and you use Jim, the local plumber, and Dave, the local electrician, who you like and have worked on other jobs, if things start going wrong, you've got this horrible blame game that everyone blames each other. Whereas if you get a turnkey operation, there's only one. There's Lindores Abbey Distillery, me, talking to for size, and we can sort things out. So that was the first tick in that. Let's do it the proper way. Second was obviously using Jim. Third was getting Gary Haggart, our distillery manager from Craggan Moor, a great guy doing a fantastic job. But so I'd made this promise to Jim about the quality. And so it was already bloody expensive. Going to for size, we were going to have one spirit still, one wash still, quite normal. That's what you'd have in a distillery of our size. And then one day Jim came back from a trip, and he had this new make, and he was sort of so excited about it. I said, you know what, I think this new make, try this is fantastic. And he kept going on about it, and I thought, yeah, it's great, but it got to the point I said, well, why are you kind of saying how good it is? And he said, well, actually it came from Annandale, and what Annandale have is the one wash still, two spirit stills set up, and I think that's what's doing it. And he said, so remember the promise you made me that we'll dig deep to find the money. And I thought, okay, yeah, I made the promise, I can't go back on it. And I've said this before, I've never built a distillery before, I've never bought stills, so very naively I kind of thought, well, two small stills is the same price as one big still, in theory. Actually, not in theory, it's just not. So it added a massive chunk. However, a bit like the Aquavitae, there's things we could have done differently if we were just focused on the cash return. But whiskey's a long-term venture, and I'm delighted that Jim persuaded me to do that, because I think that the two twin stills is one of the big factors in our spirit evolving as it has, because there's obviously more copper contact, and that's made it lighter. So yeah, whilst we could have done it cheaply, I mean, another big factor, which I like to think demonstrates that we sacrifice money for quality, is our fermentation. So our fermentation is 117 hours, which is one of the longest. It's not the longest, it's one of the longest. And that's because that's what gives us the best spirit. And the way that's evolved, so with Jim tragically passing away, what happened was I left it a respectful amount of time. I know his family. I'm delighted to say we're friends of the family, and Jim is honorary member 1495 of our Preservation Society. So I left it long enough and said, look, I don't want to be crude and talk about business, but could you send over Jim's file on Lindores, because we kind of really need it. Because it turned out there wasn't a Lindores file, because the way Jim worked was, once he'd work with us, we'd build a distillery, we'd work with the spirit, and when everything was right, according to Jim, we would then get this big manual saying this is how you do it, which would have been handy, but we didn't have that. So Gary kind of got given the keys to a great toy, if you like, but had to do it the hard way. So he didn't have Jim's manual saying, well, okay, it's a 70-hour fermentation, etc., and that will give you this yield, etc. So yeah, an absolute all credit to Gary. He took the ball and sort of ran with it, to use an analogy, which has led to what we've got. So whilst we definitely always respect Jim's input and his pictures up in the still house for all sorts of reasons, after his memorial, etc. So we're Jim, but with a twist, if you like. His spirit lives on, and I know that sounds corny, but he started this journey, and I'd like to think he would, approve of what we've ended up with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right to tip a hat every single time. But it must be nice for Gary to have being able to develop it for himself and have ownership of it, and not be following a recipe, if you like. So
exactly.
One of the things you touched on there was, and it's something that I'm fairly new to the whiskey industry, having just come in the last kind of couple of years and working with the shop. Mike was, I don't know, fortunate. I was fortunate to get a job from Mike in the shop. I'm not so sure he was so fortunate. But I've been struck by the friendship and the way that people help out. And you were saying that, you know, all these people that kind of helped and gave you advice, and all the people that go to Anthony's door, you know, having worked in kitchens and chefing all your life, were you quite struck by the way that people are so helpful, and the industry of whiskey is so camaraderie? Everybody looks after each other.
Absolutely. From day one, you know, I've been to God knows how many distilleries, you know, to meet people and see what they're doing, etc. And even since we've been open, because at first they probably thought, well, that's fine, it's just Drew chuntering on about Lindores, it'll never happen anyway. So, and I think there was a genuine element of that. So maybe when it started happening, I thought, oh Christ, we told them everything. But I got great, especially as I said from Anthony Wills, but been to so many places, and I've made so many good contacts with people. And I think that's one of the things that I love. I genuinely do. You know. With Rassay and Harris, and especially all the new ones in King's Barnes, we're all friends, we all chat, we all sort of share experiences and things. Because at first I did think, oh blimey, we're also competitors. But then when you think about it, on the shelf in our local shop, Luvian's, for instance, we are sort of competing for space. But in the whiskies, as you guys know, is a global market, so there's room for us all, especially all the small ones. You know, we're not entering into the Diageo, Edrington battles of boardrooms and all that kind of stuff. We'll just sort of plow our own furrow. But having said that, the one thing I've always done throughout is kind of not join the bashing of the huge companies. You know, I suppose if Diageo hadn't gone into China, etc., we wouldn't have been able to go in on the slipstream and things like that. But not just on the corporate stage. You'll probably remember a few years back, I mean, literally only about 2 or 3 years back, there was a great documentary series about whiskey. And I remember them talking to the Coopers at one of the Diageo distilleries. And those guys were 5th, 6th generation. So it kind of bugs me a wee bit when some of the new ones are hammering the Diageos and the Edringtons, because the actual individuals within them, we're not talking the marketeers and all the people, the million layers of management, but the actual people that are making the whiskey and fettling the cask, etc., are every bit as artisanal and craftsman-like, and all the words that people bandy about as the guys that we use. So yeah, no, it's a great industry to be in. You know, we love it.
A great point there. That when you have these conglomerates, you know, the boardrooms and all that, the marketing, it's important to remember that the guys on the floor. Some of them might be more automated, I assume, but from that, it's, you know, it's the same skills, it's the same crafts, and the same generational links, as you say. People are, you know, grandfathers and fathers and sons follow suit. So yeah, it's a great nod to that side of things. I would add, I mean, when you took the next stage from when Gary took on and you got into the casks. So I'm not sure how Jim obviously had an idea going forward on what casks you would use and what you would fill and the end product.
Yeah.
Did Gary have the final say on what cask product for the release? Or
yeah, no, we have so basically what happened with Jim was we had got to the cask stage, and one of the things that happened, which I look back on it now and it's great, and I'd love to go back there at some point, but I still remember a meeting with Jim in Edinburgh, and so it was just at the beginning of the build stage, and he was saying, well, look, we need to talk about casks. Mm-hmm. I said, right, okay, fair enough. He said, look, you and Helen need to head down to Louisville. You've got to go and meet my cask guys down there. And I said, well, that's great. Good, I'd love it. He said, no, but you really do. You need to get your visas and get down there quickly. And I said, well, yeah. We're trying to build a distillery. Casks are important. We'll get to that point. He said, no, I'm telling you. And he said, look, the reason is that one of his other clients, probably his biggest client at the time, was Cavalan.
Yeah.
And his guys he'd had the same conversation with his guys from Cavalan. So they were heading down to Kentucky to secure their sort of bourbon barrels and things like that. They said that you've got to get there before then because they'll clean it out. And so I always look back to, like the Wacky Races or one of those things where you saw a map of the world and these arrows coming from Taiwan and Scotland to get to Louisville first. Luckily, we got there first and we got our cars. But what I really liked about it was, I like the old school situation. So what Jim was saying is, look, you can send a million emails and this, that, and the other. He said what these guys like to do down there is just meet you and shake your hand and make eye contact and have a chat, and then they'll be your supplier. So that's really what we did. So with Jim's huge contacts, and I think arguably with Jim, maturation was probably what he was most famous for. So he'd worked out what he thought our spirit would be like. So the funny thing is, if you go to a distillery, it's a Jim distillery when they talk about bourbon, STRs, and sherry, and that's what we are. It's all different. Every Jim distillery has a different end game, but yeah, that's what we've ended up with, and we love it. So yeah, Jim. I suppose you could argue that Jim's input was at the most important stages. So it was about the casks, it was about the physical setup of the distillery, and where we were very lucky is because Jim had worked on so many distilleries, we benefited from, and it's tragic because others would have beyond us. But so what happened with every distillery, likewise we're here, things worked and things didn't work. So we, I suppose, benefited from the things that hadn't worked. Just daft things like right angles in the piping, for instance, doesn't help when you're doing your sip work and clearing them out. So little things like that we benefited from, where sadly the earlier distilleries had to kind of deal with it.
Yeah, that's. I suppose you don't really, like you say, that is something that if you were doing this yourself, you would never think of, and having that is tremendous. And I mean, obviously, as a chef in a previous life, and still currently, you still make the soup in the visitor centre, and all
every
that.
now, if they let me near it. I genuinely found it therapeutic, because it would be a big tub of soup. And so you're doing all the bits and the bobs and things like that. And I kind of, every now and then, I thought it's quite nice. I'm not worried about other things. I'm just making soup. That'll probably be my epitaph. The soup. Yeah, never mind the whiskey and the aquavitae.
I'm happy making soup. Yeah, I love it. And so you've obviously got quite a refined palate yourself, from the chef. And did you was it yourself or was it Gary that gave the final go ahead for the flavor?
It was teamwork. One of the things that frustrates me more than anything is my lack of palate, genuinely. Okay. And it's funny, so that quite funny enough. So the dram I just poured was Glenmorangie Madeira wood, because Helen and I worked for
old school
years ago. Yes, it's been around for a bit. And but what does frustrate me, so chefing, I've never been a smoker, but I can't pretend my palate is as good as it should be. I wish it was, and I'm learning. The one thing that's been good about doing all this is I'm learning what I like, etc. So yeah, it has helped me. But yeah, no, I'm very much a learning curve. So what we did here, and this was an idea we unashamedly nicked from, there was a Great Wee series about Isle of Harris Distillery on Alba TV.
Oh yes, yeah.
They set up, and I'm sure they're not the only ones, but I know Simon up there, and I freely admit we nicked their idea, was having a kind of sensory panel, a tasting panel, So that's what we did here. We advert in the paper, in our local paper, Courier, saying whiskey tasting panel. But we did say, look, in the small print, don't just think it's free booze, So anyway, we got all these locals and people came down. And really, there was no whiskey at first. There was no free whiskey at first because you had to do the sensory bits and bobs. And I was a bit nuts because I obviously put my name down for it. And I thought, and I said, look, don't just put me on because I'm the boss. So I was a wee bit nervous, but I did scrape through. So we ended up with a panel of about 10 people from all walks of life, ended up on the tasting panel. So that's kind of how it evolved. And this is way back, even with the Aquavita and the New Make Spirit. And what happened, and it's I love the way it kind of grew organically. See, that works for us, called Lorena, who is originally from Chile, and she moved to Newborough, our village, with her husband a few years back. And Lorena joined us in the kitchen because we had a wee cafe, a couple of years back now. And she's a fantastic cook, and she may even see this. She's a fantastic cook of Chilean food. Whereas soup and scones wasn't necessarily her forte. So we thought, well, but she's too nice and she's too clever to say, well, sorry, we don't need you as a cook. So Lorena started doing Spanish tours, but also organizing, more importantly, the sensory panel. And she's also got a degree in food science from Santiago University. So it started off that really Lorena was organizing, but the more it evolved, she became more and more involved, and she's now really, along with Gary, our sort of main blender. So we love the way that's evolved. But with the sensory panel, it really was a bit like the dare I say, the Euros, that, we had 5 and then we had 4, then we had 3, 2, 1. And so that's where it was done. So it's kind of done by committee, because I held my hand up saying that it can't be down to me because my palate's not good enough. And just going back to Jim, and he was a gentleman and very honest in the sense. So very early on, I had the discussion with him saying, well, God, it's my distillery, because I could maybe be the distillery manager. And he kind of looked at me and said, well, I'll tell you what, just go and Google, distillery manager. So I went online, and like everything else, there's something on YouTube, and there's this guy who is a distillery manager. And I realized after about 10 seconds, that's it's all about paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But I've always believed that through this whole project is, do what you're good at, etc., but surround yourself with people like Gary, like Jim had, for instance, and let them do their bit. So I work with Gary a lot, etc., but ultimately when it comes to the whiskey side of it, he still, we bounce things off each other and our colleagues, but so it's kind of done by committee. But Gary's the guy that has created this spirit, so for him it's his baby. And when I got that was when very early on, before the whiskey was on and people were taking samples, and luckily one of the other people that's been a great help and advisor and friend is Richard Patterson, and Richard was here taking a couple of samples of casks, and I could see, I was a bit nervous. I thought, what if he says, Christ, this is awful? But I could see Gary, that was genuinely his baby, and luckily Richard liked it, so all was well.
We've got a couple of questions coming in. Dave Ferguson's asking a couple, so I'll hit you with both of these at a time, and we'll probably follow up with Phil's question. When is the next release? We know we just had the inaugural kind of double release, I suppose.
Well, what we're going to do can't say the exact date yet, and I'm not being coy about it, but we just genuinely don't know, because I don't know if there's any of our members tuning in, but just to quickly say this, is, we had phenomenal response to the release, etc., but coupled with Brexit and everything else, and the huge numbers, there's a first time for everything, and we live and we learn, but there's some poor buggers, and we hate it, that haven't got their bottles yet. We're working on a daily basis, and it's quite difficult sometimes. And I do absolutely get where they're coming from. It's probably quite painful when you're seeing other people enjoying their Lindores and they haven't got there. So that's, if they're here, that's a wee apology to them. But what we're going to do for our next release. So the core will be the core. So a bit like going back to Kilchoman and Anthony, and exactly that's it. So going back to the Kilchoman model, so it's a bit like me saying nicking ideas from Harris. We'd also maybe nick ideas from Kilchoman in the nicest possible way, in that they have their core. So it was Machia Bay, for instance, that would be their main brand for a couple of years, and then they maybe do 4 special releases. So we're going to kind of follow that pattern. So our core will be that for a couple of years, but then obviously it is getting older. So our first limited release after this, well, I'd like to think will be September, but of course we're already on the 5th of August, so that's why I'm not kind of promising it'll be then, but it will be around then. And what we'll do is, we were saying earlier, we've got the bourbon, the STR, and the sherry. We'll do a release, and the first one will be a bourbon, because one of the things we learned, which I'm really proud of in a funny way, is when we did some deconstructed tastings before the launch of the ingredient, the 3 main, sorry, he says holding up 4, the 3 ingredients, the bourbon, the STR, and the sherry. When we did the tastings, the one thing that was commented on most, and it was all favorable, we always do say, look, be honest, don't be too brutally honest, but be quite honest. We're big enough to take criticism. But the one thing I really liked was, what people loved best was the bourbon, because in my opinion, and in fact, in people that know far more than I, the bourbon doesn't give the new make any place to hide. We're aware that this is 3.5-year-old whiskey. Well, this isn't. I'm pointing at the Glenmorangie, but the Lindores. Yeah, so
it could well be. It could well be.
Yeah, but the Lindores is a 3.5-year-old malt, single malt. So we're aware that it is a young whiskey, and so with all the young whiskies from all the different distilleries, that's one of the things that's quite tricky. That you're bringing it to the market probably earlier. If money was no object at all, and for some of the distilleries less important, if you like, they can do that. You can wait till it's 10 years old or whatever, because there's that kind of backing, and I completely get that, and I think that's fine. We, like nearly all the other ones, don't have that luxury. So there's that funny balance about you, because I was always a bit cross about some of the distilleries would say, well, here's our new whiskey, it's 60 quid, 70 quid a pop, but don't judge us by it. And you think, well, you can't say that. You can't ask someone to pay 70 quid and then not judge you.
Exactly.
So we wanted to make it that we think, well, actually, we are proud of it. We know it's young, but we're really sort of proud of it. And so with our new award-winning new make, we thought, well, if the one that doesn't disguise things as a bourbon, let's release that first. If it was heavily sherried, then you couldn't judge how it was, because the new make is hidden. If it was peated, it's slightly hidden, etc. So we thought, well, if we're asking people to say this is Lindores just from bourbon, they are, see what you think of it. So yeah, that's the first one that will be coming out.
That's exciting. Me and Russell are both big bourbon cask fans.
Oh, good. So, likewise.
Yeah, very much.
And so the next question we've got from Phil about the casks. Just on that subject, have we got any unusual casks in the pipeline? Have you gone down the mezcal or tequila route, or?
We didn't go that far. we do have Calvados, which I think is working fantastically. We have some really the nicest one for me, because as I say, again, leaving the bank manager out of it, my kind of heart is so much to do with the history as well as the physical distilling. So a couple of years back now, we got the quick backstory is the monks that built Lindores and populated Lindores were from Tiron, Gardez, a tiny wee village in France, about 50 miles south of Paris. Their monastery still exists because they didn't have the Reformation and all that kind of stuff. So we've had really nice visits backwards and forwards. So what I thought would be a nice idea is let's get some oak from Tyrol, make casks out of it, and see where it goes. And if I'm brutally honest, I thought, well, it's a nice story rather than what will it do with the spirit.
Yeah.
So it was an absolute fluke, and a really nice fluke, that the spirit's working fantastically. And we've actually just commissioned another 40 casks because it's working really, it's maturing quickly. So that will be one of the earlier releases as well, because it's maturing faster than we thought. And it could, you know, obviously, as you guys will know, there's no point thinking it's a great story and then it kind of goes past its best.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other nice thing is we're planting trees over in Tyrone to replace the oak we're using for casks. So it's nice. So yeah, so we've got quite a lot of exotic ones in the pipeline, because after setting down the rules, these are our core casks, the bourbon, the STR, and the sherry. Let's start doing experimenting. And in fact, what would give people a bit of a clue, if you on our website, it probably, and I should know this completely, but I'm sure if you delve deeply into the website on the cask, because we do a lot of cask sales, and it'll show you some of the casks we have for sale. And what we always do, if we're buying sort of exotic casks, we'll buy a couple to sell to an individual, and the rest we'll keep for ourselves. So we do have a really kind of exciting array to sort of bring out, some weird, nothing too off the, you know, because I know when the rules changed and people started doing mezcal and tequila and Christ knows what, it got a bit, you know, it was a new idea, and I can understand people going hell for leather, but yeah, we thought, well, let's just see what works and what doesn't work. In fact, funny enough, except it was going to be one of the bottles I had nearby, but it's just gone by the wayside now. One of the casks, or one of the sets of casks, was Montbazillac, and I noticed the other week that Tomatin were bringing one out. So, and I had that, and it was really nice, you know. So our Montbazillac cask.
Thank you for saying that, because I had no idea how to pronounce it. So that I've got it.
Well, I'm not sure that either.
Montbazillac.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard it Montbazillac or Montbazillac.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I like that one. Yeah.
I'm not even sure if I'm getting Tomatin right.
You say tomato, I say tomato.
But it was really nice. It was a good dram.
Yeah. Now that I've got it in my hand, I'm going to have to pour it. Of the collection, they took out 3 French class. We've got the Sauterne and the Rive Salt. That's another one. Rive Salt, Rive Salt, Rive Salt.
You're
asking the wrong man, but
talking about rivers, and it was something I was wanting to ask. I'm away of the time, and we're kind of coming towards the end of an hour. But you know, just on reading a little bit about your background and stuff. When your dad had the Ardo Hotel, and you were doing a bit of gilling on the river, is fishing something you've kept up? Do you still get a bit of
not as much as I would like to. Yeah. It's funny, it's intertwined. It's a weird old world with Ardo, and I spent many years up in Aberdeen, and it's a big part of you know, I'm half Aberdeenshire and half Fife and things like that. And we moved, I suppose, living next door to the D, to living next door to the Tay. So it's always been part of my life. And when I'm asked in some things about the very first time I had whiskey, was when I was about 13 on a fishing trip with my dad. And at the end of the day, Dad and the Gilly were having a dram. And as a 13-year-old, I was kind of nagging, "Oh, give me a dram," and this. And they were kind of saying, "Oh, right, okay, that'll be right." And so they gave me one, and I thought, Jesus, that was fire water. And by the end of it, it was a bit like if the glass was like that. Yeah, there was that much whiskey and that much water, and I could kind of feel the Gilly kind of thing. That's a bloody waste. But yeah, so it's kind of ironic that I've ended up with a whiskey distillery in a sense.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Right. So we've got David's asking, can he buy an ex Lindores Abbey cask? Can he buy an old cask from you, or are you reusing it?
We're not really doing that because we're reusing it at the moment. Sorry. But yeah, no, we're kind of keeping them all under lock and key at the moment. Because of course, having just done our first bottling, it's the first time that we've had all our casks being reused again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Am I right in thinking you share a bit of warehousing with gosh, I'm on the road, Inverurie. There we go.
We do. We've got some that. Yeah, we're in a funny situation at the moment because we have one on-site warehouse, which was the old cattle shed. So when it was a dairy, etc., my dad had Aberdeen Angus. So genuinely, it's a cattle shed is now our on-site warehouse. And it's all racked out, but that's long since been filled. So at the moment, our casks are in Inverurie and down in the central belt. But what we've just literally put the planning permission in to put 2 full warehouses up at Brace. So all our barley comes from the 2 neighbouring farms, Braeside, Lindores and Park Hill. So we're putting 2 warehouses up at Braeside. So all our barley comes within quarter of a mile, and all our casks will either be on site or at Braeside. So we just want to bring everything home. We like the idea of that. I know it's about sustainability and all these things, but it's also about, it just feels that's what we should do. It just makes sense.
Farmland. I mean, it's the terroir and everything round about there, the ability to be able to do that is fantastic.
Yeah.
And we've really growing as a whisky region.
Well, it is, isn't it? We've got Kings Barnes, Daft Mill, we've got the whole lot, and it is. I mean, we've got some of the best agricultural land around, and for us, it's a big commitment because we have obviously signed up to get all our barley from the 2 neighbouring farms. And here's me talking about it on things like this. So what we can't do if it's a bad harvest, we've got problems because we can't kind of say all this and then say, oh Christ, let's get some flown over from wherever. So we work with them, and I'm sure they'll do us good, but the yields might not be what we would want to do. But that's what we do. We've just, the timing of this is interesting because as of 3 days ago, it was our first organic run. So we got barley from Falkland Estate, which is 7 miles away, which is the really important part about that is the fact that going all the way back to 1494 and Friar John Core, the barley was for King James IV, who would have been at Falkland Palace. So to get the barley from Falkland Palace is a really special thing. And to add to that, it's been malted by a company you may not have heard of, but anyway, Crafty Maltsters, which is a very new enterprise. I mean, it's a 6th generation farming enterprise where they've set up a maltings in Uchtymachty, which is 3 miles over the hill, all for brewing and distilling. And so we've had our first organic batch through just 48 hours ago. So we like to do, we're putting our heads down, to use the chefing analogy. Once you've got it right, you just do the same on a Tuesday as a Saturday. That's you leave the frills behind. It's just hard graft, and that's now we've got the recipe right for the whiskey. That's what we're doing with the spirit, but it does leave a wee bit of time for things like this organic run and other things we'll look at in the future.
Super. It seems like you've got such a good little enterprise running there. That, long may it continue, and hopefully the farmers don't have any bad yields and can keep surviving with great barley. I think
surely there can't be a bad yield in the Kingdom of Five, surely.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm hoping. I've got my fingers crossed.
We'll keep them crossed too.
Thank you.
I think we are trying to keep it. The last 2 chats that we've had, the last 2 Blethers have gone on.
Into next week.
We are keen to keep it to an hour. We're already 10 minutes over, but we could sit and chat with you all night. Let's be honest. That it's such a fascinating history. And yourself, we haven't even got to Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman tonight.
That's true.
So I wish we could sit here and chat all night. But we appreciate the hour that you've given us. It's been absolutely fantastic. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. Hopefully we can get down to the distillery tour.
Dave certainly saying we should do this again, so maybe we need a part 2. And we often say that as well. We need a part 2.
Always happy. There's always new things going on here. So. It'd be great to see you guys down here. But happy. It'd be great to do another chat when things are moving on.
We'll be down sometime soon. If the doors are open, I'll pop along. I'll be in Newbury anyway to see Neil. So yeah,
excellent.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Stu. Raise a glass. It's not a Lindores one, it's a tomato one, but
I'm still in the Lindores.
Excellent.
Lindores.
Good night, guys. And thanks to everyone for joining us and your questions and comments. And have a great weekend. We'll see you all again very soon.
Cheers, now.
Everybody.